And going abroad now, United States President Donald Trump and his Democrat challenger Joe Biden are spending their final day of campaigning in Pennsylvania, one of the key battleground states that could determine the outcome of this year's election. More than 90 million people have already cast their ballots in early voting, putting the country on course for its highest turnout in a century. To get an understanding of the U.S. election, we are joined via Zoom by international relations specialist in U.S. and Africa, Brooks Spector. He's with the University of Witwatersrand. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, good afternoon. Let me just correct. I haven't been with the University of Witwatersrand for some years. I'm now associate editor at the Daily Maverick, but that doesn't change the things that I know or pay attention to, just the nameplate in front of the door.
All right, noted. Thank you very much for that update. Now, let's talk about campaigning when it's at this peak. Do you think the two candidates have done their best and they've done enough of groundwork to convince Americans who to vote for in terms of tackling the issues that are convincing?
Well, I mean, it depends a lot on what you view as. If you take Joe Biden's case, he's done a very good job of focusing attention on what he believes to be the key issues that are most concerning to voters. First and foremost, the COVID pandemic and its effect on individuals, as well as the deplorable response by his statements that the Trump administration has carried out. And then concurrently with that, the economic difficulties that have flowed from the pandemic. And third focus has been on the ineffectualness or the lack of coherence of the Trump administration more generally, and the fact that the president seems unable to focus effectively on national issues. The Trump administration, or Donald Trump in his campaign mode, has tried to focus attention on what he calls the issue of law and order, doing this largely to rally his supporters and to encourage those people who might not necessarily vote but agree with him to show up and actually vote. The statistics will tell you, the attitude surveys tell you that Donald Trump's support of approval ratings on actual policy has remained pretty steady at about 42, 43%. The problem with that, of course, is 42 or 43% does not convert into a winning majority when you're talking about an election. So the two strategies have actually been very different. Whether they have been effective, we get to find out in about 48 hours.
So which states are key for both of them, and how do you see the swing states affecting the results in terms of where they have been campaigning?
Well, because the way voting is carried out for the presidential election, you don't simply total up all the national votes, the so-called popular vote, and the winner of that would then therefore be the president. Instead, you win state by state by state, and that state weight is a function of its relative population. So of the 538 possible electoral votes, 55 of them are apportioned to California because of its very large population. 20 are given to Pennsylvania, 29 to Florida, and so forth. And so you have to win enough of those states' electoral votes to achieve 270 out of the 538. 270 is a majority of that number. That means that you're not necessarily worried about states in which your supporters far outweigh any other party. You worry about states like Pennsylvania and now North Carolina, perhaps Georgia, Florida, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Arizona, where the division between the two parties is judged to be fairly even right now. And so the small marginal percentages become important. If you can convince 2% more people in, say, Pennsylvania to come to your side, you may well have the net gain of those 20 electoral votes. And the same is true then, therefore, with all the other swing states. And so that's how you build up an electoral majority from those kinds of building blocks. It's like assembling a giant Lego toy out of the nation.
So now the upset by Donald Trump in his victory in the last 5 years was really shocking. This time around, how strong is Joe Biden as a contender? Because you'll remember that during the build-up towards the election, everybody thought, or let me say, many people thought Hillary Clinton was going to come out victorious, and to everybody's shock, she lost.
Well, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote, but as you and I have discussed, that's not necessarily dispositive. She actually lost in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania by a grand total of 78,000 votes over the 3 states, roughly a card game's worth of people per precinct. Not a lot. You could fill up a sports stadium with more people than that total. And as a result, the argument is she did not, that is, Hillary Clinton probably did not spend quite enough time dealing with voters in those 3 states or encouraging them not simply to vote for her, but enough of them to come out, because now we introduce the other idea of turnout. It's very nice if you win a state by a majority, but if the state is a complicated place like Pennsylvania with 2 large cities and a very large rural hinterland and a group of relatively affluent suburbs, you're not going to be able to convince everybody with exactly the same kinds of words. You have to appeal to inner city voters, you have to appeal to more affluent suburbanites, and you have to somehow convince people living in small towns and rural areas that you are the appropriate candidate too. So now it becomes a more complicated task to build up a win in a state like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, or especially a place like Florida, big state, very diverse kind of demographics. And so that's where the tactics in a campaign become really complex and at the same time very important.
So when you look at a non-sentimental and undecided voter who is looking at crucial issues and key points of campaigning on the points of argument regarding COVID-19, economic growth, job creation and climate change, the 2 contenders, differ when it comes to those policies. So then when it comes to foreign policy as well, is another argument in as far as Biden and Trump are concerned. What has appealed to the voter this time around in terms of how the 2 candidates have handled those issues and whether or not they are spoiled for choice in this matter?
Well, the surveys are pretty clear that the most preeminent, the single most important issue for a majority of voters, not everybody, but certainly a majority of voters, has been the COVID pandemic and its effects on society and education, its effects on healthcare, and its effects on the economy. That's a very large clump of things that worry or concern voters. And one of the problems is that, at least the challenges for Donald Trump, is that although in recent weeks he has been hammering away at the question of law and order, there has been this extraordinary advance voting, vote by mail rush. Close to 100 million voters have now cast their ballots that way. So in the last week or 2, any argument that a candidate has made hasn't had the effect that might be desired, because the voters have already made their choice. They've already put their X on the ballot, and those voters are no longer in play. And I would add another point: in this election, unlike most of them, very few people remain undecided. The survey data says that when you ask, are you in favor of John or Bill or undecided, very few people at this point were prepared to say they were still undecided. So the Biden case, if it was made correctly, that COVID has been grievously mishandled and its then effects on the economy and healthcare, if he made that case strongly enough and made it to people who have already voted, he may have locked down the vote this time around. If, on the other hand, if Donald Trump succeeds in convincing people the issue of law and order is somehow more important than that, that may still bring it to him. I suspect, and I'm going out on a limb because we still haven't counted any votes, I suspect that the Biden forces have made the stronger, or at least the more effective argument in terms of the majority of the voters.
All right, thank you very much for making time to speaking to us. We are here speaking to international relations specialist in the U.S. and Africa, Brooks Spector, who is also with the Daily Maverick. And of course, we are now going to look at different issues now. But first, let's take a break. When we return, we check what's happening in the world of business.